The heights of success and the depths of pride. Margaret Sinclair, founder and CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, strolled confidently down the polished corridors of her corporate headquarters. Her heels echoed on the marble floors as she passed by staff who quickly made way, their gazes admiring yet filled with nervous reverence. Margaret had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, fighting her way to the top with nothing but raw determination, savvy intelligence, and a refusal to let anything or anyone stand in her way. Today had been an especially momentous day. She had just signed a deal that would expand her luxury real estate company to international markets, a deal that would make Sinclair Enterprises one of the most powerful companies in the field. The adrenaline of success pulsed through her as she made her way to her private office, her meticulously tailored suit and understated but striking jewelry reflecting the power and elegance she exuded. Margaret leaned back in her chair, letting the skyline of the city stretch out before her like a kingdom she had conquered. She picked up her phone and dialed her closest friends, eager to celebrate. "Ladies," she purred, "how about a little celebration? Meet me at La Celeste in an hour." La Celeste was one of the city's most exclusive dining establishments, a place where only the wealthiest could afford to eat, and where Margaret was treated like royalty. Her friends agreed instantly, and after completing a few last-minute tasks, she left her office, nodding curtly at her assistant before stepping into her private limousine. As her chauffeur navigated the bustling streets, Margaret let her mind drift to the evening ahead. She deserved this, she reminded herself. She had fought tooth and nail to reach the top, and now she could bask in the luxury and respect she had earned. The world was at her feet, and nothing, she believed, could take that away. When she arrived at La Celeste, the maitre d' greeted her with a warm, deferential smile. "Miss Sinclair, always a pleasure. Your table is ready." She returned his greeting with a slight nod and allowed herself to be led to her usual table, a private corner that overlooked the sparkling city lights. Shortly after, her friends arrived, all of them accomplished in their own right, though none could match Margaret's reputation. As they settled in, laughter and toasts filled the air, celebrating their latest achievements. "I hope you're ready for a night to remember," Margaret said, a self-assured smirk gracing her lips. After all, Sinclair Enterprises just secured a deal that will reshape the industry. Her friends applauded her success, their admiration mingling with envy. However, as they laughed and clinked glasses, a young waitress approached their table, her demeanor quiet but professional. She carried herself with poise, despite the nervousness visible in her eyes, as she greeted the ladies. "Good evening," the waitress said, her voice soft but steady. "Welcome to La Celeste. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you this evening." Margaret barely looked up, her gaze sliding over the waitress as if she were invisible. But one of her friends, intrigued, asked Maya about her experience working at such a high-end establishment. Maya, visibly grateful for the acknowledgement, smiled shyly and explained, "Working here is part of my training. I'm studying hospitality management, and I believe in understanding every aspect of the business, from serving guests to managing staff." Margaret's brow arched slightly, a faint sneer tugging at her lips. "So," she drawled, "you're just waiting tables as a stepping stone. How quaint." Maya's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Yes, Mom," she replied. "I believe learning from the ground up is the best way to understand what makes a restaurant succeed." Margaret laughed lightly, dismissing the thought. "Well, I suppose everyone has their own way of aiming for success, don't they?" She gave Maya a patronizing smile before turning back to her friends, effectively dismissing her presence. Her friends chuckled along, and the air around the table grew colder as they exchanged knowing glances, each silently relishing their superior position over the humble waitress. As the evening continued, Margaret indulged in a bottle of fine champagne, chatting and laughing with her friends, relishing the world she had carved for herself. Little did she know that beneath the polished veneer of her perfect evening, a single thread had begun to unravel, a thread that would lead her down a path of self-reflection, humility, and transformation that she could never have anticipated. Margaret's insatiable pride and sense of superiority blinded her to the person standing in her shadow, a person who held far more power over her future than she could ever imagine. And with each dismissive comment and haughty sneer, Margaret was sealing her fate, one that would test her values, strip away her illusions, and reveal the truth about who she truly was beneath the glittering success. A thin line between power and perception. The celebration at Les Celestes was in full swing, and Margaret, fueled by success and champagne, was basking in her own sense of accomplishment. She was holding court, sharing stories of her latest deal, every word crafted to remind her friends, and anyone within earshot, that she was a woman at the pinnacle of power. Maya, the young waitress, had been assigned to their table and did her best to provide seamless service, her professionalism unwavering despite Margaret's condescending remarks. She could feel the tension in the air, but she was determined to keep her composure. This wasn't the first time she had been treated this way by a wealthy patron, but something about Margaret's arrogance made it sting a little more deeply. As the night wore on, Margaret's sense of entitlement only seemed to grow. Her voice rose, her laughter echoed through the dining room. And soon enough, her focus shifted back to Maya. Watching her gracefully move between tables, Margaret felt a spark of irritation. Here she was, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, yet she couldn't shake the sense that this young waitress didn't appreciate the privilege of serving someone as successful as her. Margaret snapped her fingers, beckoning Maya back to the table. "Maya, was it?" Margaret asked, her tone dripping with a thinly veiled contempt. "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, maintaining eye contact and a professional smile. Margaret leaned back in her chair, eyeing Maya with the kind of critical gaze usually reserved for objects, not people. "Tell me, Maya," she began, her voice low but clearly audible to everyone at the table, "are you content with this job?" Maya hesitated, the question taking her off guard. She felt the eyes of everyone at the table boring into her, expecting her to say something humble, perhaps even grateful. "Working here is part of my education," Maya replied carefully, choosing her words with the utmost caution. "I'm learning about the industry from the ground up, and I hope to manage my own establishment someday." A snicker escaped Margaret's lips. "Manage? Well, let's hope the dream comes with a heavy dose of reality, dear. Managing a business is no small task. It takes more than optimism. You'll need connections, influence, and above all, a realistic mindset." Margaret's friends chuckled, their laughter blending with the hum of the restaurant, and Maya felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She wanted to respond, to say something that would remind Margaret she was more than just a waitress with ambitions, but her training held her back. She nodded politely, enduring the moment in silence. Satisfied with herself, Margaret turned her attention back to her friends. "I swear, everyone these days has such lofty dreams, but they lack the backbone to make them happen," she remarked, her words aimed pointedly at Maya as she walked away. A turn in the evening. The night continued, but the air around their table had shifted. Margaret and her friends had grown louder, more boisterous, their laughter becoming increasingly careless. To them, it was just another celebration, but for Maya, it was a trial of patience and endurance. Every time she approached their table, Margaret found a reason to criticize. Whether it was the timing of the wine service or the way a dish was plated, nothing seemed to meet her impossibly high standards. Then, as Margaret was finishing another glass of champagne, she noticed a figure at a nearby table. The figure's back was turned to her, but something about the person caught her attention. The man was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, exuding a quiet confidence that Margaret found intriguing. She tried to peer closer, but his face remained obscured. "Who's that?" she whispered to her friends, her curiosity piqued. Her friends glanced over, shrugging. "No idea, but it looks like he's someone important," one of them replied, just as curious. Maya returned to their table to refill their glasses, and Margaret, still watching the man, asked, "Do you know who that is over there?" Maya glanced at the man briefly, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Yes, Mom. He's a frequent guest here." Margaret leaned in, eager for more information. "And it's he. Someone I should know." Maya simply smiled, a look of quiet satisfaction crossing her face. "He's well known, yes, but I'm afraid I can't say more. We respect our guests' privacy." Margaret scoffed, annoyed that Maya wouldn't give her more details. "Privacy? Well, I suppose that's to be expected at a place like this." Margaret turned back to her friends, their conversation moving on as they speculated about the mystery man. But the feeling of curiosity lingered, and Margaret found herself glancing in his direction repeatedly. His presence unsettled her, though she couldn't explain why. Crossing a line. The evening continued, and as the restaurant began to wind down, Margaret's behavior took another sharp turn. When Maya returned to the table with the check, Margaret glanced at her with narrowed eyes. "Would you hurry up?" she snapped, her patience worn thin by champagne and her own unchecked irritation. "Yes, Mom," Maya replied, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes as she handed Margaret the check. Margaret took it, glanced over it quickly, and then tossed her credit card onto the table. As Maya reached for it, Margaret's gaze hardened, and she spoke loud enough for everyone around them to hear. "You know, Maya," Margaret began, her voice laced with a cold superiority, "people like you should learn to be grateful for opportunities like this. Not everyone gets to serve people of our status." Maya's hand froze, her grip tightening on the edge of the table. Margaret's words echoed in the quieting restaurant, a few heads turning to watch the scene unfold. Maya took a slow, steady breath and met Margaret's gaze, her voice calm but firm. "With respect, ma'am, I do value my work here. But I believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter their position." A chill fell over the table, Margaret's friends glancing at one another uncomfortably. Margaret's face reddened with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She had expected Maya to simply nod and accept her words, not to stand up for herself. "Oh, so now the waitress has an opinion," Margaret sneered. "You don't get to lecture me on dignity. You're just here to serve." Maya took a step back, her calm facade slipping as she swallowed hard. She turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight, but her expression tinged with hurt. The unveiling of truth. In the midst of this, the figure Margaret had noticed earlier finally stood up from his table, his movements calm and assured. He adjusted his jacket, his gaze lingering on Margaret's table as he approached. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. The man was handsome, in a refined, authoritative way, his eyes sharp and observant. There was a subtle air of familiarity about him that Margaret couldn't place, but his presence commanded attention. He stopped at her table, and with a smooth, polite tone, he addressed Margaret directly. "Excuse me," he began, his gaze unwavering, "but I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the waitress. Is everything all right?" Margaret, taken aback by his sudden approach, attempted to collect herself, her demeanor shifting to something more reserved. "Yes, of course," she replied quickly. "Just a minor issue with the service. Nothing to be concerned about." The man's eyes held steady on hers, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "You seem very comfortable asserting yourself," he remarked, his tone mild but edged with something sharp. "I assume you're aware of who Maya is." Margaret's brows furrowed in confusion. "She's a waitress, isn't she?" she replied, her voice uncertain. The man's expression softened, though his gaze remained intense. "Yes, she's a waitress here, but she's also my daughter." The words landed like a hammer. Margaret's face drained of color, her friends exchanging shocked glances as they absorbed the man's revelation. The mystery man, whom Margaret had perceived as simply another successful diner, was Maya's father. And more than that, there was an unmistakable power in his presence that made Margaret realize she had gravely underestimated the situation. He let the silence stretch, allowing Margaret to fully grasp the weight of her actions before he spoke again. People often reveal their true character when they believe they're above others. he continued, his voice calm but unyielding. You had the privilege of speaking to my daughter, who works hard and carries herself with grace despite facing people who would look down on her. It seems, he added, his gaze piercing, that dignity is something you could learn from her. Margaret's friends looked away, uncomfortable and embarrassed by the scene unfolding in front of them. Margaret sat frozen, her usual poise shattered, her mind reeling as she realized the extent of her miscalculation. As he turned to leave, the man cast one final glance at Margaret. Respect is earned, not bought. And it's clear to me that wealth alone doesn't make one worthy. The quiet authority in his words echoed in the hushed room as he walked away, leaving Margaret to face the uncomfortable truth of who she had become in her pursuit of power. For the first time, her arrogance felt hollow, and a sense of shame crept in, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Margaret left the restaurant that night with a shaken heart and an unsettled mind. The breaking of pride. The following morning, Margaret woke up with a strange heaviness weighing on her heart. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the events from the previous night replaying in her mind. The man's words echoed through her thoughts, each syllable slicing through her usual armor of confidence like a blade. Respect is earned, not bought. And it's clear to me that wealth alone doesn't make one worthy. Margaret sat up, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the sheets. She had built her life on success, on projecting an image of control and superiority. Yet in a single moment, a stranger with quiet authority and dignity, had shown her a side of herself she could barely recognize. For the first time, she was forced to confront the possibility that her ambition had turned her into someone she never intended to become. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting her out of her thoughts. She reached for it, seeing a message from one of her friends from last night, a shallow attempt to gloss over the uncomfortable scene. They had messaged to assure her it was nothing, and that Maya's father was probably just being overly sensitive. But instead of comforting her, the message only deepened the unease gnawing at her. She knew that what had happened was more than a mere misunderstanding. It had been a clear reflection of her character, a mirror she had been too arrogant to look into until now. Unable to shake the feeling, Margaret decided to confront the problem head-on. Dressing in her usual polished, designer attire, she told herself that she would handle this, just like she handled everything else, with precision and control. She made her way to La Celeste, where she hoped to speak to the maitre d' and find out how to contact Maya and her father to formally apologize. Uncomfortable discoveries. As she arrived at the restaurant, the familiar smell of fresh linens and gourmet spices filled the air, but for once, the setting felt intimidating rather than reassuring. Margaret had come to associate La Celeste with her successes, a symbol of her social status. Now, it seemed like an arena where her power held no sway. The maitre d', Charles, noticed her as she entered and hurried over, his face carefully polite. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her, "back so soon. How may we serve you today?" Margaret took a breath, steeling herself before responding. "I'd wanted to reach out to one of your staff members, Maya. She was my waitress last night." Charles' expression faltered slightly, and he hesitated, unsure of her intentions. "Miss Sinclair, is there a problem I should be aware of?" "No," she replied quickly, trying to keep her tone light, but even she could hear the discomfort in her voice. "In fact, quite the opposite. I owe her an apology for how I spoke to her last night, and I'd also like to speak with her father if that's possible." At her words, a flicker of surprise crossed Charles's face. He studied her for a moment, as if seeing her in a new light. "Miss Sinclair," he began slowly, "Maya's father is indeed someone of note in our community, though he prefers to keep a low profile. I'm not at liberty to share his personal information, but I can certainly let Maya know you wish to speak with her." Margaret nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of her had hoped for a quick resolution, a conversation that would allow her to apologize and move on. But deep down, she knew that an apology alone wouldn't be enough to mend the harm she had caused. both to Maya and to herself. Charles glanced at her thoughtfully before continuing. Maya should be arriving shortly to start her shift. If you'd like, you may wait here, and I'll let her know you're here to see her. Margaret hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of waiting like a common patron. But she nodded, knowing this was a necessary step if she wanted to start making amends. Charles led her to a discreet seating area near the entrance, and as she settled in, she realized how unfamiliar this situation felt. She was used to people coming to her, eager to gain her favor, but now she was the one waiting, hoping for a moment of another person's time. The weight of reflection. As she sat there, Margaret's mind began to wander, tugged along by memories she hadn't visited in years. She remembered her early days, back when she had first started Sinclair Enterprises, with little more than a stack of paperwork, endless ambition, and a willingness to do whatever it took to succeed. Back then, she had been willing to work any position, to understand every aspect of her business, just as Maya was doing now. But somewhere along the way, she had shifted from being a leader to a dictator. Her ambition had slowly turned to arrogance, her drive to cruelty. She had convinced herself that her success justified everything, that it was acceptable to look down on those beneath her because she had earned her way to the top. The realization left her feeling hollow. She had prided herself on building something substantial, on becoming a person of influence and power, but in the end, she was realizing that true strength lay in humility, a quality she had all but abandoned. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. She looked up to see Maya walking toward her, her expression a mixture of caution and professionalism. Despite everything, she had agreed to meet with Margaret, which stirred something unfamiliar in Margaret's heart: gratitude. "Miss Sinclair," Maya greeted, her tone courteous but guarded. "I was told you wanted to speak with me." Margaret stood up, feeling the weight of her own shame settling on her shoulders. "Yes, Maya," she began, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I owe you an apology for my behavior last night. I acted thoughtlessly, and I disrespected you, which was completely undeserved." Maya listened quietly, her face unreadable as Margaret continued. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I regret my actions. I'm realizing that I've let my position get to my head, and last night was a harsh reminder of the kind of person I've become." For a moment, Maya said nothing, her eyes studying Margaret carefully. "Thank you for saying that, Miss Sinclair," she replied at last, her voice steady. "But I think you should know that apologies are only the beginning. Change comes through actions, not just words." Margaret nodded, feeling the truth of Maya's words sink deep. "I understand, and if there's anything I can do to make things right, please let me know." Maya paused, considering. Respect doesn't come from a position or a title. It comes from how we treat others, especially those we may think have nothing to offer us. I've seen people in high positions who are kind and humble, and I've seen people who've lost their way in their own power. She looked at Margaret, her gaze unwavering. "Which one do you want to be?" The question lingered between them, and Margaret realized that she had no easy answer. She felt a sense of vulnerability, a raw honesty that left her feeling exposed. "I want to be better," Margaret replied quietly, "and I will prove it." The beginning of transformation. After leaving Les Celeste, Margaret drove through the city, her mind swirling with the weight of Maya's words. She knew she couldn't go back to the person she had been, nor could she erase the harm she had caused, but she was determined to make things right in whatever way she could. The next day, she gathered her senior management team at Sinclair Enterprises for an emergency meeting. The room was filled with murmurs of curiosity as her employees wondered why she had called them in on such short notice. Margaret took a deep breath, knowing that this was the first real step in her journey toward change. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady but resolute. "I've been reflecting on our company culture, and I've come to the conclusion that it's time for a change. I want Sinclair Enterprises to be known not just for success, but for integrity and respect at every level of our organization." Her employees exchanged surprised glances, some looking skeptical while others nodded in quiet agreement. To that end, Margaret continued, "I'll be implementing a mentorship program within the company, pairing senior staff with entry-level employees to encourage a culture of mutual respect and understanding. It's important to me that every employee here feels valued, regardless of their position." The room fell silent, and Margaret could feel the tension in the air as her employees processed her words. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She would likely face resistance, and people would doubt her sincerity. But for the first time, she felt a deep resolve to earn their trust, to prove that she was willing to change. Later that day, as she sat alone in her office, Margaret felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. This journey she was embarking on was unfamiliar and daunting, but she knew that it was necessary. Maya's words had ignited something within her, a spark of humility she hadn't felt in years. In the days that followed, Margaret found herself reaching out to people she had once dismissed, taking the time to listen and understand their struggles. She reconnected with her past, with the young, ambitious woman who had started from nothing, and she began to let go of the arrogance that had poisoned her journey. For the first time, Margaret was discovering the true meaning of success, not in power, but in compassion and humility. And as she continued on this path, she knew she was finally beginning to build something real, something lasting, something worthy. Breaking through resistance. The meeting with the senior team was scheduled for the following afternoon. Margaret arrived early, pacing her office, mentally preparing herself for the resistance she was sure to face. This would be the first time in years that she would ask her employees for honest feedback, and the thought of it unsettled her. When Emma informed her that the team was assembled in the conference room, Margaret took a deep breath and made her way there, her heels clicking against the polished floors. She entered the room to see a dozen of her top executives, each with guarded expressions. Some looked curious, others skeptical, but all of them were waiting to see what she would say. She took her seat at the head of the table, clasping her hands to keep them steady. "Thank you all for being here. I want to discuss the concerns you've raised about the mentorship program. I'm aware that change isn't easy, especially given how firm I've been in the past." Her voice softened as she continued, "I know I haven't always been the most approachable leader, and I understand if some of you are finding it difficult to adjust to this new direction." A murmur rippled through the room. Some executives exchanged glances, unsure if they believed the humility in her words. Margaret swallowed, pushing herself to continue despite the tension. "I started this program because I realized how disconnected I had become from the people who helped make Sinclair Enterprises what it is. I believe we owe it to our employees to foster a workplace where everyone feels valued, from entry-level staff to senior management." David, a longtime executive who had been with Sinclair since its early days, cleared his throat. "Margaret, with all due respect, you built this company by demanding excellence and keeping high standards. Some of us worry that the mentorship program could undermine that. People might start seeing you as soft." Margaret felt a flicker of her old defensiveness flare up, but quickly tamped it down. She looked at David, her gaze steady. "David, I understand why you feel that way. And believe me, I don't intend to lower our standards. This is about raising people up, not letting them slide." The room fell silent, her words hanging heavily in the air. Some executives nodded slightly, while others looked unconvinced. Margaret realized she needed to offer more than just promises. "I'm committed to proving that this isn't just a passing phase," she continued. "I've decided to participate in the program myself. I'll mentor one of our new hires and spend time learning from their perspective. This way, I'll experience firsthand what I'm asking each of you to do." The announcement took everyone by surprise. Margaret Sinclair, CEO of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, mentoring a new hire. The idea was almost unheard of, and the room filled with murmurs of shock and intrigue. Sensing the shift, Margaret pressed on. "I've chosen to mentor Anna, a recent hire in the marketing department. She has incredible potential, and I believe working with her will help me understand the impact this program can have." She paused, letting her words settle. The room fell silent again, and this time she could see some of the resistance fading from her executives' faces. The notion that she was willing to go through the same process she was asking of them left an undeniable impression. David, the most skeptical of the group, finally nodded. "Well, Margaret, if you're willing to get your hands dirty, then maybe, just maybe, this could work." Margaret offered a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you, David. That's all I ask. Let's give this a fair shot, a lesson in humility." Later that week, Margaret began her mentorship with Anna, a young marketing assistant who had joined Sinclair Enterprises only a few months prior. Anna was bright and ambitious, with a natural talent for branding and social media, but she was also hesitant, unsure of her place within the company. She had heard stories of Margaret's exacting standards, and although she was honored to be chosen, she couldn't hide her nervousness during their first meeting. Margaret noticed Anna's hesitation and tried her best to make her feel at ease. "Anna, I know this is unconventional," she said, "but I'm here to help you grow, and to learn from you as well. You have insights that I don't, and I want us to work together as equals." Anna nodded, still a bit unsure, but Margaret could see her relaxing slightly. They began their session by reviewing some of Anna's recent projects, and Margaret offered her feedback with a gentleness she wasn't accustomed to. It was challenging to restrain her natural instinct to control every detail, but she reminded herself that this was about supporting Anna, not managing her. As the weeks went by, Margaret found herself developing a genuine fondness for Anna. She was reminded of her own early days, the determination she had felt, and the insecurity she had hidden behind a veneer of confidence. Through her interactions with Anna, Margaret started to see the strengths of collaboration, of building people up instead of cutting them down. In one of their meetings, Anna shared an idea for a new social media campaign, something innovative that would target younger audiences in a way Sinclair Enterprises had never tried before. Margaret listened, her mind open and curious, and she felt a surge of excitement. "This is brilliant, Anna," she said with a smile. "I think we should take this idea to the next strategy meeting." Anna's face lit up with pride, but her excitement quickly faded. "Really? Do you think they'll take me seriously? I mean, I'm just an assistant." Margaret shook her head. "You're not just anything, Anna. Your perspective is exactly what we need to stay relevant. You have a voice, and I want everyone in that room to hear it." Anna looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief in her eyes. Margaret realized in that moment that respect wasn't a gift she could demand. It was something she had to give first, if she wanted it in return. An unforeseen encounter. One evening after a particularly long day, Margaret decided to stop by a quiet, family-owned cafe she used to frequent years ago, when she was just starting her career. She hadn't been there in ages, and as she walked in, memories of her early struggles flooded back. The cafe was cozy and inviting, with the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee permeating the air. Margaret ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, watching people pass by, lost in thought. She barely noticed when someone approached her table until a familiar voice broke her reverie. "Margaret Sinclair," the voice said warmly. She looked up, surprised to see none other than Maya's father, the man whose words had haunted her since their encounter at Les Celestes. He smiled politely, though there was a guarded quality to his gaze. "Mind if I join you?" Margaret nodded, her heart pounding slightly as he took a seat across from her. She felt a surge of vulnerability, a sensation she was only just beginning to accept. After all, this man had seen her at one of her lowest moments. "I'm surprised to see you here," he remarked, his tone conversational. Margaret chuckled nervously. "I suppose I'm trying to reconnect with my roots, a bit of soul-searching." He nodded, as if he understood completely. "It takes courage to face ourselves honestly," he said. "Most people spend their whole lives avoiding that mirror." She looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. "Your words, they really got to me that night," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You made me realize how far I'd strayed from the person I once was." There was a brief silence before he responded. "Then perhaps my words served a purpose. I didn't say them to hurt you. I said them because I believe every person has the capacity for change, even those who have forgotten their own humility." Margaret looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the edge of the cup. "I thought success meant being strong, unbreakable. But I see now that I've hurt people in the process." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze compassionate yet unwavering. "Strength isn't about breaking others down to build ourselves up. It's about lifting others up while still reaching our own goals." The simple wisdom in his words struck Margaret deeply, and she found herself nodding. "Thank you," she said softly, "for reminding me of that." He smiled gently, the guardedness in his expression softening. "And thank you for being open to change. Many people resist that, clinging to their old ways out of pride." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, a mutual respect forming between them. Margaret sensed that this conversation, this brief connection, was another step on her path to redemption, a path that she knew she still had far to travel. A new chapter. When Margaret returned to Sinclair Enterprises the next day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation with Maya's father had reminded her of the person she wanted to become, a leader who inspired respect through compassion, not fear. During a strategy meeting, Anna presented her social media campaign idea, her voice steady and confident. Margaret watched her protege with pride, noticing the looks of approval and intrigue from the other executives. She had not only given Anna a platform, but had set a new standard within Sinclair Enterprises, one where everyone, regardless of their rank, could contribute meaningfully. As the meeting concluded, David, her skeptical executive, approached her. "I have to say, Margaret, this mentorship program might actually be worth something after all," he said with a reluctant smile. Margaret chuckled, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you, David. I know it's been an adjustment, but I think we're on the right track." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, people are starting to notice the change in you. It's inspiring, to be honest." Margaret felt her heart swell with gratitude. "That means more to me than you know, David. I just hope I can continue to live up to it." As she walked back to her office, Margaret realized that her journey was far from over. She had taken the first steps toward becoming the leader she wanted to be, but the path would be ongoing. Each day would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose humility over arrogance, compassion over control. She knew that the road to true transformation was long and fraught with difficulty, but for the first time, she felt confident that she could navigate it with grace. And she knew, deep down, that Maya's father had been right. Strength lay not in dominance, but in the ability to uplift those around her. Margaret Sinclair, once feared and revered for her relentless ambition, was discovering the true meaning of success. It was a lesson hard learned, but it was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Embracing true leadership, Margaret's transformation continued, slowly but visibly. Within a few months, her changes began to ripple outward, altering the very fabric of Sinclair Enterprises. Where there had once been a hierarchy of fear, now there was a budding sense of trust and camaraderie. Margaret's mentoring sessions with Anna had become the talk of the office, not only for their results but for the impact on everyone watching Margaret embrace this new approach. Each morning, she made a point to greet employees by name, asking about their families, their goals, and even their concerns. Her senior team watched her carefully, slowly adopting some of her new practices. Yet, as the changes took hold, Margaret couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her journey was still incomplete. She had reformed her approach at work, but her transformation needed to reach further. Her wealth and status still created a barrier between her and those she wanted to connect with. It reminded her that while she was learning, she still had a long way to go. The uncomfortable truth of past habits. One afternoon, as Margaret reviewed reports in her office, she received a call from Emma. "Miss Sinclair, there's a woman in the lobby asking to speak with you," Emma said, her voice tentative. She said it's about unpaid bills from last year. Margaret's brow furrowed in confusion. She couldn't imagine what this could mean, but curiosity pushed her to agree. Send her up. Minutes later, a woman in her late 50s walked into Margaret's office, dressed in simple clothing and carrying a thick stack of papers in her hands. She looked nervous but determined as she met Margaret's gaze. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Sinclair," the woman began, her voice polite yet firm. "My name is Angela Grant. I own a small catering company, and I supplied food for one of your events last year." She held up a file. "However, my invoices were never paid, and my attempts to contact your finance department were unsuccessful." Margaret felt her stomach drop. She remembered the event in question, a lavish gala for prospective clients. She had been so focused on impressing investors that she delegated most of the planning to her team, and evidently, the final payments had slipped through the cracks. She took a deep breath, her discomfort rising as she reviewed the invoices. The debt was substantial for a small business, especially one like Angela's. "I'm terribly sorry, Ms. Grant," Margaret said, genuinely remorseful. "I assure you this was an oversight, and I'll see to it personally that the invoices are paid immediately." Angela's face softened with relief, but Margaret could see the strain in her eyes. She'd seen that look before, on employees, on clients, and even on herself when she'd first started out. Angela had probably been waiting on this money for months, and it had clearly taken a toll. "Thank you, Miss Sinclair," Angela replied. "This money will help my business recover from the losses we suffered waiting for payment. But honestly," she added, her tone growing bolder, "I don't understand how something like this could happen. I've heard of other small vendors who faced similar issues when working with large companies. It makes it hard for small businesses to trust that their work will be respected." Margaret winced inwardly. This encounter revealed a truth she'd ignored for too long. The cost of her single-minded ambition. Her empire had been built on hard work, but she hadn't always considered the impact her success had on the lives of others, especially those without the same resources or power. "I understand, Ms. Grant," she replied solemnly. "And you're right. There's no excuse for this. If you be willing, I'd like to meet with you further, to understand how Sinclair Enterprises can improve our processes and ensure this doesn't happen to any other vendors." Angela looked at her in surprise, clearly taken aback by Margaret's offer. "Well, yes, I'd appreciate that," she replied, her voice softening. "It's rare to see someone in your position acknowledge these issues. Thank you." As Angela left, Margaret sat back in her chair, the weight of her realization settling over her. This wasn't just about paying bills or mending professional relationships. She was beginning to see that real change would require a shift in how she approached everything, from her business to her interactions with the world around her. A step outside her world. Determined to follow through, Margaret began reaching out to other small vendors and contractors who had worked with Sinclair Enterprises. She invited them to meetings, listening as they shared stories of delayed payments, unreturned calls, and impersonal dealings. Some were cautious, clearly unaccustomed to being heard by someone in her position, while others were openly skeptical. One of the most impactful conversations came from a young man named James, who owned a printing company that had provided Sinclair Enterprises with brochures and materials for years. When they met, James didn't hold back. "Miss Sinclair, I don't mean to be disrespectful," he said, "but it's hard to believe you care about us small business owners. We don't have the influence or the connections to demand timely payments or respect from companies like yours. And for a long time, I felt like just another name in a ledger to you." Margaret felt his words like a punch to the gut. She hadn't meant to treat people this way, yet she could see the truth in his assessment. Her wealth and success had insulated her, distancing her from those whose lives she affected but rarely saw. It was painful to confront, but she thanked James sincerely for his honesty. "James," she said, "you're right, and I can't undo the way I've operated in the past. But I want you to know that I'm committed to changing how we do business. I'll make sure that Sinclair Enterprises is a place where small businesses are valued and respected. I owe you, and others like you, that much." James looked at her with a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. "I hope you follow through," he replied. "If you can do that, Miss Sinclair, you'd be setting a rare example." The ripple effect. Margaret's new commitment to accountability soon extended to her personal life as well. Inspired by her conversations with vendors, she began volunteering at a local business mentorship center, teaching young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds how to navigate the challenges of running a business. She quickly discovered that many of them were grappling with issues she had long since forgotten: limited resources, difficult clients, and the constant struggle for respect and recognition. One Saturday, during a session with a group of budding entrepreneurs, Margaret noticed a young woman sitting quietly in the back of the room. Her name was Layla, a single mother trying to start her own bakery business, and she rarely spoke up. Margaret was intrigued by her shyness, sensing there was more to Layla's story. After the session, Margaret approached her, inviting her for coffee. As they talked, Layla opened up about the challenges she faced, not just the financial struggles of starting a business, but the constant judgment she received as a single mother, and the skepticism from those who doubted her abilities. Margaret listened intently, her heart aching with empathy. She saw in Layla the same determination she'd had when she was starting out, yet Layla's journey was far more challenging, and not just because of financial limitations. It was the weight of societal expectations, the relentless pressure to prove herself, that made Layla's path so difficult. "Layla," Margaret said softly, "I want to help you, if you'll let me. I can connect you with some resources, help with funding, and introduce you to people who can support your business." Layla looked at her, eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Sinclair. I can't tell you how much this means to me. It feels like maybe I'm not alone in this." For Margaret, the experience of mentoring Layla and others like her brought a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just giving advice. She was building relationships, offering support, and using her resources to lift others in ways she had once dismissed as insignificant. This was a different kind of power, one that left her feeling fulfilled in a way she had never experienced. A new kind of legacy. Back at Sinclair Enterprises, Margaret's changes had begun to take root. The mentorship program she'd started was thriving, with employees from all levels participating. Her senior executives, once skeptical, were now actively involved, and the culture within the company had shifted toward mutual respect and open communication. The company was even starting to see tangible benefits: a happier workforce, more loyal clients, and partnerships with small businesses that valued the support and respect they now received from Sinclair Enterprises. Months later, during an all-staff meeting, Margaret stood before her employees, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and humility. "Thank you all for your hard work and dedication," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've learned more in these past few months than I did in years of running this company. I've learned that success means nothing if it comes at the expense of others, and that the greatest legacy we can leave is the impact we have on the lives of those around us." There was a long moment of silence, and then, to her surprise, the room erupted into applause. Her employees, who had once feared her, now respected her for her vulnerability, her willingness to change, and the authenticity of her leadership. As the applause died down, Margaret looked out at the faces before her and felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She had spent so many years chasing power and wealth, believing that these were the markers of success. But now she understood that true success was measured not by the empire she had built, but by the lives she had touched. In the months that followed, Margaret continued to work with Layla, with Anna, and with countless other people she had once overlooked. She had transformed Sinclair Enterprises from a corporate giant into a place of connection and empowerment, a place where everyone, from the newest intern to the longest-serving executive, felt valued. And for Margaret, this was the beginning of a new kind of legacy, one built not on wealth or prestige, but on compassion, integrity, and the simple, enduring power of kindness. The fruits of redemption. As a full year passed since Margaret began her journey of transformation, her life and legacy had been profoundly altered. Sinclair Enterprises had evolved, shifting from a rigid corporate empire into a company that valued integrity, diversity, and meaningful relationships. Margaret, once known for her ruthless ambition, had become a respected mentor and advocate for ethical business practices. Yet she knew that real change was not a destination but a continuous path. One day, while reviewing some reports, she received an unexpected invitation. It was a letter from a prominent business conference known as the Global Leaders Summit, a prestigious event attended by CEOs and thought leaders from around the world. The letter invited her to speak about her journey, her success, her failures, and the transformation she had undergone. The words on the page filled her with equal parts excitement and trepidation. Margaret had always avoided public introspection, preferring to let her achievements speak for themselves. Yet, as she considered the invitation, she realized that her story might inspire others who were trapped in the same relentless pursuit of power, unaware of the harm it could cause. After a long, thoughtful pause, Margaret accepted the invitation. A story of humility and change. The day of the conference arrived, and Margaret found herself standing backstage, feeling more nervous than she had in years. As she peered out at the packed auditorium, she recognized the faces of many influential figures in the business world. Some she knew personally, others she had competed with over the years. These were the kinds of people who had once been her rivals, her measures of success, and now she was about to share her most vulnerable truths with them. When the host introduced her, Margaret stepped onto the stage, her pulse racing. The spotlight was blinding, but as her eyes adjusted, she felt a surprising calm wash over her. She was no longer the woman who needed validation or approval. She was here to be honest, to share what she had learned. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady but warm. "Many of you know me as the founder of Sinclair Enterprises, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I had built my career on hard work and ambition. But I'm here to tell you a different story, one about the cost of that ambition and the lessons I learned when I finally confronted the person I had become." The room fell silent, her audience riveted. She spoke of her early struggles, the sacrifices she had made, and the relentless pursuit of success that had driven her to the top. But then she took a deep breath and recounted the fateful evening at La Celeste, where her arrogance had been laid bare and where she had first begun to see the cracks in her own character. "It was a moment I will never forget," she said softly. "I was at the height of my career, but in that instant, I realized that I had lost something more important than any business deal. I had lost touch with my own humanity, with the respect and empathy that every person deserves." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Many faces in the audience showed signs of recognition, some nodding quietly as if they, too, had faced similar moments of reckoning. Margaret continued, describing the journey that had followed, her apology to Maya, her decision to change the culture at Sinclair Enterprises, and the mentors she had found in unexpected places, like Maya's father and the young entrepreneurs she now worked with. "In business, we often talk about growth, profit, and innovation," she said, her voice stronger now. "But real success, I've come to realize, is measured by the impact we have on others. It's not about climbing to the top alone. It's about bringing others with us, lifting them up and valuing their contributions." As she concluded her speech, a standing ovation erupted. Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest, not the pride of accomplishment, but the deep satisfaction of having shared her story openly, of showing others the possibility of change. The ripple of influence. Following the conference, Margaret received an overwhelming response. CEOs, entrepreneurs, and even aspiring business students reached out to thank her, some sharing their own stories of transformation. She realized that her journey had struck a chord beyond her expectations. People were hungry for a new kind of leadership, one rooted in empathy, respect, and purpose. As Sinclair Enterprises grew, Margaret implemented programs that reflected her commitment to these values. She established an ethics committee, composed of employees from every level, to ensure that every decision aligned with their values of respect and inclusivity. The mentorship program expanded, with seasoned professionals mentoring not only new hires, but also youth from disadvantaged backgrounds, many of whom had never considered a career in business before. Among these young mentees was Layla, the single mother Margaret had met months earlier. Layla's bakery, supported by Sinclair Enterprises, had begun to flourish, with her pastries gaining a loyal following. At Margaret's encouragement, Layla also began speaking at community events, sharing her story of resilience and determination. The young mother who had once doubted her place in the business world now inspired others to pursue their dreams, regardless of the obstacles. One afternoon, as Margaret visited Layla's bakery, she watched her work with customers, laughing and chatting with the warmth of someone who had truly found her purpose. Margaret felt a deep sense of pride and joy, realizing that her support had helped create a space where Layla could thrive, where her talent and dedication could shine. "Miss Sinclair," Layla said, approaching her with a shy smile, "I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done for me." Margaret shook her head, a gentle smile on her lips. "Layla, you've done all of this on your own. I just helped you see what you were capable of. You're stronger than you think." Layla's eyes shone with gratitude, and Margaret knew that her legacy was no longer defined by her achievements alone, but by the lives she had touched and uplifted. A final reconciliation. Months later, Margaret received an invitation she had not expected. It was from Maya's father, inviting her to a community charity gala. She hadn't spoken to him since their last encounter at the cafe, and the invitation felt like an olive branch, a chance to reconnect on even terms. When she arrived at the gala, dressed simply but elegantly, she found herself drawn to the familiar face in the crowd. Maya's father stood with a group of community leaders, his demeanor calm and grounded. He noticed her approach, and his face softened with a gentle smile. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her warmly, "I'm glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me," Margaret replied, feeling a genuine sense of humility. "I owe so much of my journey to the words you spoke that night. They opened my eyes in ways I can never repay." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, we're given moments that force us to see ourselves clearly. I'm glad my words had meaning for you." Margaret felt a sense of peace as they stood together, no longer divided by status or power, but united in their mutual respect. They spent the evening talking, discussing the changes she had implemented at Sinclair Enterprises and the impact of her new initiatives. At one point, Maya joined them, smiling at Margaret with the warmth and respect that had once been absent. "Miss Sinclair," she said, "thank you for being willing to change. You've inspired a lot of people, including me." Margaret felt a surge of emotion, grateful for the acceptance she had worked so hard to earn. She had found something more meaningful than success. She had found redemption, a purpose beyond herself, and a legacy that would extend far beyond her years. The future of Sinclair Enterprises. In the years that followed, Margaret's impact continued to grow. Sinclair Enterprises had become a model of ethical business practices, earning recognition not just for its financial success, but for its commitment to social responsibility. Employees took pride in their work, knowing they were part of a company that valued them as individuals, and community leaders saw Sinclair as a partner in empowering local businesses and underserved communities. Margaret's transformation became a story that was told not only within her company, but in classrooms, boardrooms, and seminars around the world. She had once measured her worth by her wealth and status, but now she understood that her real value lay in the positive influence she had on others. One evening, as she walked through the offices of Sinclair Enterprises, she stopped by the mentorship program's meeting room, watching as employees and students from local schools gathered around a table, animatedly discussing ideas and solutions. Margaret felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that this was her true legacy, a place where anyone, regardless of their background, could find mentorship, support, and respect. As she left the building, Margaret looked back at the Sinclair Enterprises logo, now representing something far greater than her name alone. It was a symbol of transformation, a testament to the power of humility, and a reminder that change, real, lasting change, was possible for anyone willing to confront their own flaws and dedicate themselves to the growth of others. In that moment, Margaret knew that she had finally found her purpose, and for the first time, she walked away not as the CEO of a powerful company, but as a woman fulfilled, content with the knowledge that her journey had not only changed her, but had left a legacy of kindness, compassion, and respect for generations to come.